This is the tweet that I'm talking about if you haven't seen it, if you're not active on Twitter or X, by Paul of Team APS. And if you don't know Team APS, probably the second biggest Yu-Gi-Oh channel on YouTube. So there's a lot of weight on what Paul says here and the big audience that he has, even though it's his personal opinion. So let's read into the tweet. My hot Yu-Gi-Oh take is that Sacky blowout cards and Floodgates actually have a place in the game. Sure, they're annoying as hell, but personally, I think a stolen win here and there keeps things chaotic and exciting. Plus, it's not like we're playing for money or anything anyway, Lamau. And there's also an attached image here of Dimension Shifter, Eradicator, Epidemic Virus, Dimensional Barrier, and Super Polymerization. Let's try to break down this tweet as best as we can while staying respectful. And I will preface this also by saying, because I already know what you're going to say in the comments below, I did win my national season using cards like Gimmick Puppet Nightmare. I think every competitive player wanting to win events goes to these events with the best odds possible. Sometimes it's cards like these. But there's a difference between playing them in order to win than advertising them as fun and exciting and healthy for the game. So moving on from that, let's talk about the tweet and try to break this down part by part, because there actually is a lot to talk about here. First of all, I want to address the Sacky blowout cards and Floodgates portion of this tweet. In the context of this, Sacky, if you don't know what it means, actually means just getting a lucky draw of a strong card, placing it face down, and just winning the game like that. I think when it comes to things like Dimension Shifter, yeah, that could definitely be Sacky. This is also something that applies for Harpy's Feather Duster and Call by the Grave, that are cards at 1 that are not really searchable by any means, but you can still draw them and win the game. When it comes to Eradicator, Epidemic Virus, and Dimensional Barrier, those two are not as Sacky as Dimension Shifter because, one, you have a whole deck that revolves around fetching these cards from the deck in Labyrinth and just setting them, getting the big body, tributing it off, and getting rid of all your hand or locking you out for the rest of the turn with Dimensional Barrier. There's also a card called Triple Tactic Thrust. It could just fetch this card from the deck and you don't even have to play 3 copies of it. In Super Polymerization, I don't feel like it actually works within this diagram of 4 cards. I think Super Polymerization is the card that, one, not every deck can actually run because of certain restrictions and extra deck limitations. 2, it's relatively easy to play around if you are aware of it. And 3, not every deck is susceptible to losing to it. Actually, most decks don't actually get their board wiped or their turn ended by a card like this. So I think Sacky is one thing when it comes to cards like Called by the Grave and Harpy's Feather Duster, but these cards are not Sacky and are not even blowout cards. These are just turn-ending, turn-skip cards that shut down entire mechanics of the game that shouldn't exist in the first place. The next part I want to talk about is, sure, they're annoying as hell. And this connects to what I mentioned previously in that these cards are not just a nuisance. Imagine you're a Pearly player and you finally, open the hand full of the amazing quick play spells that your deck has, only to get hit with Eradicator, Epidemic Virus during the draw phase, losing all of these cards or maybe just activating one of them and then having to hit another card on the way. Or like we've seen in a lot of feature matches recently, where a Kashtira player gets 5 spell cards ripped out of their hand during their draw phase without any way to respond. And this is twofold here, right? One, these cards don't actually have very good responses. We don't have Red Reboot anymore, so basically when it comes to Shifter, Eradicator, and Dimensional Barrier, it's either you draw the one-off Called By or draw the cross-out designator that you have to play with the correct target in the deck. And similar to Mystic Mind format, we are now having to alter our decks and side decks to account for these extremely powerful cards that just either shut down our deck or get rid of our hand completely, not allowing us to have any competitive edge over our opponent. And this is the point I'm trying to make here, that this is not a nuisance, this is not a one-off thing, this is a huge problem within the game. Continuing, but personally, I think a stolen win here and there. I do want to address the stolen win portion of this tweet. So Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game about competition. It is a competition between 2 players to see who can win a duel. Sometimes it is for higher stakes like a YCS or original win. Sometimes it's just the locals or just playing with friends. Regardless, this game revolves around competition, winning and losing. Now, there are 2 main components for competitive gaming. One is a skill gap and 2 is competitive integrity. So whether it's a card game or a video game, you need 2 main things in order to be competitively viable. 1, you need a platform that allows players to show their skill, whether it's in strategy or deck building over time. And 2, you also need competitive integrity, which means that you want a fair and even playing field as much as possible. So if, let's say, we were talking about a competitive video game tournament, you don't want one team to be playing on PS1 controllers and the other team to be playing on brand new PS5 controllers. So a stolen win that was achieved by one of these cards actually makes the skill gap a lot lower, meaning that opponents can actually steal wins out of you by not really playing the game but just using overly powerful cards. And also the competitive integrity is not kept because you won the game or your opponent won the game by playing a card that hasn't allowed their opponent to even shoot back and just remove their entire hand or lock them out of their engine completely. Now the next point is keeping things chaotic and exciting. So chaotic and exciting can mean a lot of different things, but I think when it comes to a competitive card game that needs to have some sort of fairness and balance, chaotic and exciting isn't what they are referring to here. Locking your opponent from playing the game completely is not really exciting for neither player. Also, it's not really exciting for spectators who are actually watching the game in something like a YCS stream or something like that. When it comes to exciting and chaotic, you can take a look at a Shizu Tier Limits format where we had really exciting and chaotic games that were determined by pure deck building, strategy, and skill. We saw those games, we were all in shock. There were memes all over the internet showing how chaotic the game state was, but still, the game was extremely fair, extremely balanced, and allowed both players to fight equally to win the game by pure skill and deck building. And when we're talking about chaotic and exciting, we can refer back to a format where Mystic Mine was a card that was played in basically every deck. It was not fair, it was overly powerful, but it did cause some sort of ridicule. It was funny to watch, but not in a haha, this is so funny and amusing. This was actually more of a frustration kind of funny, where people were just like, this is becoming ridiculous and this is a funny part of the game, but not the type of fun that we want. And the last one is probably the worst one of them all. It's not like we're playing for money or anything anyway, Lamau. And of course, not every player has to play super competitively. Some people just go to locals, just play with friends. That is perfectly fine. And I think also stating your opinion as such is absolutely fine. I understand that there is a large casual audience to the game that sometimes, or most of the time, Konami likes to cater to in order to keep them in the game with very powerful cards that allow them to steal wins over their opponents without really showing a display of skill. Just drawing the right card against the right deck is usually enough. But to come here and saying we're not playing for money is, one, correct. The pricing in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not as such where you lose incredible amounts of money by not winning a finals. But on the other hand, a lot of competitive players and players who take the game seriously, and I think that is absolutely fine to take a hobby so seriously and competitively, are, one, paying a lot of money to buy the cards, get the right decks, get their equipment, and of course, travel to events. Whether domestically or internationally, traveling to an event could be several hundreds or thousands of dollars just to participate in the event. Of course, nobody has to participate in those events or spend that much money, but to say that money is not relevant when it comes to discussing unfairness is just absolutely wrong. And of course, it's not just money, it's also time. People take a lot of time to prepare for these events, even not the most competitive players, but if you do come to an event, you do want to succeed to some degree. And that takes money, time, and commitment in order to prepare, to get the right cards, to get the right build, to get your equipment, your sleeves, your deck box, and of course, the traveling is just... Saying that we're not playing for money is not exactly true in this context. And even if we're not playing for money, just for, the achievement, for the title, for the status, for your own accomplishment, I think it's unfair to say that this game has no stakes at all when it comes to competitive play, because people put a lot of effort into preparing for an event. And another tweet that sparked my attention was this tweet saying, real question for anyone who continually complains about Shifter, how am I supposed to stop or beat a deck like Tier Limits going second without Shifter? So I do want to address this in a more generic way, and that discussion revolves around the necessary evil. The necessary evil thing about Yu-Gi-Oh is that sometimes in order to beat powerful combo decks, you have to play things like Troll and Lockbird, Dimensional Barrier, or Dimension Shifter. Those cards usually just stop your opponent in their tracks, making them stop their turn, pass it back to you, and giving you a chance to play. And the claim is that if you don't play these cards or don't activate them, you essentially lose on the spot because your opponent's deck is just too powerful that you just have to play these ultra out cards. This is actually correct. I do agree with this take. I do agree with the fact that sometimes you are supposed to use a necessary evil like Troll and Lockbird to deal with something like Drytron. Otherwise you just lose the game on the spot, right? It is half true, because this is what the game of Yu-Gi-Oh currently looks like, and I think it comes down to a bigger design flaw within the game than just this deck is good, I have to play this really overpowerful card. And yeah, sometimes you will have to play these cards. So yeah, I think it's a valid take, but I think it also comes down to what Yu-Gi-Oh currently looks like and problems with things like there is no resource management, there is no real resource management that actually keeps the games slower and more intentional, like in games like Magic, where you have to place your mana, you can only do it once per turn, you have to invest resources to play the right cards, and you just can't spill your entire deck on the board like Yu-Gi-Oh! And also there's no rotation, so all cards are legal at all times since the beginning of the game, except cards on the Forbidden and Limited list, meaning you can come up with some crazy things with very old cards that just don't seem fair in today's metagame. And because you can do all that, and because there is no resource management or rotation in Yu-Gi-Oh, sometimes decks are extremely powerful and you have to play the extremely powerful outs to them. This is not something that could be solved by just discussing it or just people gentlemen's agreementing to stop playing these cards. This is an inherent design flaw within the game that Konami will or will not fix in the future, and up until then, maybe those necessary evil cards will remain necessary for us to play. But I think overall, cards like Dimension Shifter and Dimensional Barrier specifically are cards that just should not exist in the game. You could have said the same thing about necessary evils when it comes to Mystic Mine, right? Mystic Mine allows you to stop the game essentially on its tracks and claim resources and gain them over time until you are ready to play, and then you can fire off at your opponent. But Mystic Mine got banned as well because Konami realized that these games are not fun, they are not fun to spectate, they are not chaotic and exciting, they are just plainly not fair and unfun, and they just create non-games that no one wants to participate in. So yeah, a lot of thoughts out of me. I would like to hear your thoughts as well in the comments below. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this topic. Let me know over on Twitter as well if you're following me there. If not, link is in the description below. Like the video, subscribe for more discussions like this. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.